Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hi, I'm Anupriya. So let's start our new chapter here, that is Nagas after Indian independence. Now, students, before this, you already have learned about the Naga history. So, in this chapter, we are going to talk about the turns, or let's say, what were the phases in which the Nagas they proclaimed their independence, or the idea of statehood, and what happened exactly after the Indian independence, when we are talking about the year 1947, how when we are talking about what were the things that Nagas they were facing or they were going through during the rule of the British Empire. So these are certain things that we are going to understand in the whole chapter. So initially we will talk about that how Nagas they tried to have the sense of pan Naga thought or pan Naga notion, as in how they developed a sense of consciousness, how they developed a sense of shared togetherness. These are certain things that we are going to understand. We are going to talk about the political changes that happened thereafter. We will talk about the violent things or the violent forces that were used here in order to suppress the government, or let's say when the government used their armed forces in order to suppress the Nagas. So there were so many things, so many ups and downs that really happened after the Indian independence and before it as well. And we'll try to understand that what were the demands of the Nagas and how it was taken care of. These are certain things that you are going to understand. These are certain outcomes that you are going to understand through this chapter, that is Nagas after Indian independence. Now, before starting the chapter, my idea is that whenever we are talking about any particular topic, anything, you should know the location of that place. Whenever we are talking about history, definitely we need to understand that which place are we talking about. So if we look at the history of Nagaland, if we look at the geographical location of Nagaland, we see that the seven sisters, here generally we are talking about the northeastern state. So Nagaland is the northeastern state here. You all are aware about the term that is seven sisters that we call here when we are talking about the northeastern states, correct or not? So here we are talking about the small place that is near Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram and Myanmar on this side, right? So Nagaland is a small place situated in the northeastern part of our country, and through this we will understand that what were certain changes that happened here before independence of our country and after the independence of the country, how were the British officials involved, and what were the subsequent changes that took place thereafter. So if we look at the map of Nagaland, the enlarged map of Nagaland, you will see these different areas. Now, if I ask you a question that students, do you know the capital of Nagaland? I mean, everyone can answer this question here, right? So here, if you look at the map, students, this is the capital. We are talking about Kohima here, right or not? And if I ask you a question that when was Nagaland granted statehood, the status of statehood, definitely you remember the year. It would be 1963, about which we are going to learn later on, right? So here we have Assam, here we have Arunachal Pradesh, here we have Myanmar, and we have Mizoram this side. Sorry, Manipur this side, not Mizoram. So you can see the map of Nagaland here. These are the districts here that you can find in the map of Nagaland. So definitely before reading the chapter, you should know the geographical location and the history of this place here. Now here, earlier students, like I told you, already have learnt about the Simon Commission, the relationship of Simon Commissions and the demand of Nagas here. Now, do you remember anything about Simon Commission? Have you heard about it? You might have heard about it, right or not? So you know that India was a colony to the British Empire for almost 200 years, right or not? And there were certain or several political, administrative, social changes that took place in the country. So there were so many policies and commissions or the committees that were formed. Similarly, it was in the year 1928 that Simon Commission, it entered or it came to our country, not entered but came to our country in order to do or in order to look over the situation of our country and suggest some constitutional changes, right or not? So it was during this period that we are talking about the Nagas who first of all wrote a petition, a list of demands here that was given to the Simon Commission, and it was headed by Sir John Simon, and therefore we get the name of the statutory commission that is known as the Simon Commission. Okay, these are some of the basic things that you should be knowing, right or not? And you have already learned about it, so this is a basic introduction for you. So when we are talking about the Simon Commission, it came to our country in 1928 and it was greeted with the slogan that is "Go back, Simon." Everyone has heard about it, right? So here we see that the Nagas people, here we see the whole community, the tribals, they demanded the restoration of their independence when the British, they withdrew their power from India. Right or not? So here we see that it was in the Simon Commission that they were talking about the independence of their own region, right? So the first demand here was that they did not want to integrate with the larger part of our country. And the recent news that you might have heard, that it was in the year 2015 that an agreement was signed with the Indian government, right? So when we are talking about the SNCN, we see that the agreement was signed with the Naga group here, where we see that they were demanding for the Greater Nagaland or Nagalingam. Right, so you're aware of all these terms here. So let us first try to understand that what was this demand all about and how it came suddenly in the picture here. So going back to the time of the First World War. Now if I ask you students that what was the timeline or the duration of the First World War? Everyone can answer this question, right? So when we are talking about the First World War, you might be wondering that how India was, related to the First World War. You might be wondering about it because we were under the rule of British Empire, right? So you can take out the connection from here that Britain had participated from the Axis power in the First World War, right? And India was the colony to the British Empire. So somewhere we were indirectly related, because when we are talking about the British Army, Indians were also sent on the forefront to fight in the war in different areas. So here when we are talking about the Naga chiefs or the Naga tribal people here, we see that they also participated in the British war efforts in 1917. That is, we are talking about the duration of the First World War. Now, it was this period that we are talking about in which we see that all the Naga people here who had participated in the British, from the British side, they were fighting, representing the British India. So we see that somewhere they got the thought of a collective identity. They got the thought of sense of belongingness to their place. Right? Understand this point. If we look at the larger perspective, you might be thinking that somewhere you have also read about the India's War of Independence. You have seen India's struggle for independence. So the collective consciousness was that everyone saw British Army or the Britain as their common enemy. And that is how the thought of collective identity, it grew among people there. Right or not? So when we are talking about the Nagas, we see that the first sense of collective identity or pan-Naga notion, it emerged from this period. So when they fought in the war, somewhere they were inspired by the material advancement. So here we see that when they got the exposure to the outside world here, when they started participating in the war, somewhere they were meeting a lot of people there, right or not? They were going on the forefront, so they're going to meet a lot of people, a lot of soldiers, a lot of civilians. So somewhere they were inspired by the material advancement, they were inspired by the exposure that they got, and also the reshaping of the political world life. And this led to the thinking of pan-Naga notion. Now when I'm saying pan-Naga notion, it means that all the Naga people, they thought themselves of being separate from the Indian territory. They wanted to create their own space, their own separate space here, right? So pan-India concept, pan-Naga concept is a two entirely different thing here. Okay? Now when we're talking about the shared consciousness that arose among the people, the Naga people that we are talking about, so definitely they took the first step here after the First World War, around the First World War when we are talking about, that it was in the year 1918 that it led to the formation of Naga Club. Now this was the landmark process. This was the landmark process in the history, or let's say whenever we are talking about the history of Naga's independence. So it was a landmark point for everyone. Why? Because this was the first club here that was formed, and here we see that all these people, the Naga people who saw themselves as distinct from, or let's say as separate from the rest part of India, they created, or let's say they reshaped their own culture, their own history. They demanded for their own separate identity here, right? So here we see that again in 1918, the Naga club that was formed. So if you're in Nagaland, you must have visited the place and you must have seen a stone encrypted here talking about the Naga club that was formed in the year 1918, which was a historic moment for all the Naga people. Now it was then renamed as Naga National Council in the year 1946. Yet again important point here. Why? Because this Naga National Council, it became the umbrella organization for all the Naga groups here. You need to remember this point. Why? Because the year is important, the name is important here. Two things that you need to focus on is the name and the year. So Naga National Council is now the new name for the Naga club here. Why? So when we are talking about all the smaller groups that existed in Nagaland, who were talking about freedom, who were talking about their own separate representation, who were talking about their political rights, who were talking about their cultural freedom, or let's say their own cultural identity, somewhere they all culminated together because they felt that they had a voice. And therefore Naga National Council, it became a larger group here, the umbrella organization with which each and everybody connected. So when we are talking about the Naga National Council, there are 3 points that you need to remember. The first point being that every Naga type had a representation. Please remember students that we are talking about the northeastern state here, and whenever we are talking about the seven sisters, everywhere you are aware that people living in these areas, somewhere they have different tribes, right or not? You can totally connect with the idea here. And when we are talking about these different tribes, all these local tribes, they have their local chiefs. Right or not? So here we see that all these Naga tribes, they had their representation, and when we are talking about the Naga National Council, it also became a platform for all the Nagas so that they could represent or express their views. Right? So everyone had a right to represent or express their views in this particular council here. The third point that you need to remember is that they could safeguard their interest. Now remember this point here students, that when we are talking about Nagaland, it is a small place, right or not? As compared to all the different states, it's a small place here. So here when we are talking about these tribes, somewhere they felt that they were cut out from the world. In 1917, when they participated in the British Labour Corps here, somewhere they got the exposure and they felt that the material investment is something, or when we are talking about the political organization, the exposure in that sense, they felt that somewhere this was a thing that they were longing for. In that sense, they wanted that their representation should be seen everywhere. Okay? So this is one point that you need to remember. The second point here is that when we are, like I told you, that there were so many ups and downs. Whenever we talk about the Nagas history here, we see that there are so many ups and downs. Somewhere we are talking about the peace accord, the agreements. On the other hand, we are also talking about the turfs, or let's say the conflicts that were happening between the Indian government and the state representatives there. Okay, so here the first point that comes here is 9-point Hyderi agreement. Now what do we understand by this 9-point Hyderi agreement? Have you ever heard about it? Let us try to understand that. So everyone knows that it was in the year 1947 that India got independent. Everyone remembers the date, it is 15th August. Right. So here we see that it was in this year that a memorandum was submitted by the Nagas in February 1947 before India got independent. Before that only, because we got independent in the year in the month August. So here when we are talking about memorandum, it means that we are talking about a signed document here with a list of demands that were submitted by the Nagas here. Now they requested the British government to set up an interim government for the Nagas with India as the guardian power for a period of 10 years. Now this was the time that Nagas, they started demanding for their own rights. Do you get the point here students? In 1918 they got the idea or the sense of Pan-Naga. Now they are trying to implement the whole ideology here by formulating different policies, or let's say they were trying to submit their demands, or they were trying the British government or the Indian government that is going to be formed should be responding to their demands. So here, before India was getting independence, everyone knew that it was by June or July that India was getting the freedom, right? India was finally going to be free from the British rule. So here we see that the Nagas, they were trying, or they requested the British government to set up an interim government. What is this interim government? Interim government here, it means that till the final government has not been chosen, there is an interim government that should be taking the power here, right? So here they were talking about the interim government for the Nagas with India as the guardian power for a period of 10 years. So this was the first basic demand that the Nagas, they put on here. Okay. Now here we see that it was in the year 1947, coming back to the point of 9-point Hyderi agreement. What do we understand by this? So here we see that it was Sir Akbar Hyderi. As you can see in the image here, this is the image of Sir Akbar Hyderi, right? So he was the then governor of Assam, who was deputed in June 1947 to meet the Naga leaders to conclude if possible an agreement could be signed regarding the status of the hills. Now here you remember, students, that in 1947 the biggest challenge for all the Indian leaders was to combine British Indian states. So you might have learned about the British Indian states that were divided into two parts. The first one being the provinces, so that was directly under the British rule, and second one being the princely states here, that was under the rule of local rulers, right or not? So here we see that a new challenging task for every leader here was that how to unite everyone, because right now they are getting the sense of independence, and in each area people, they were ruling or they were under the local rajas. They did understand the idea of independence, but were they understanding the idea of being together in that sense? India as a nation, a concept that we are looking at today. So here we see that when we are talking about Nagas, they were already trying to formulate their own separate state here. So here Sir Akbar Hyderi, he was sent in order to conclude an agreement in which they could see that there is a status quo for all the people here. So this was the 9-point agreement that was signed in June 1947. Okay. So here please remember, it's still happening before India's independence. Right. So this was the 9-point Hyderi agreement because of the name of our leader here, that is Sir Akbar Hyderi. Now while the Nagas, they demanded complete independence at the end of the period, the government of India insisted on a future agreement. See, now at this time you might be aware of so many other states who did not want to participate, or let's say who did not want that they should be integrating themselves in the Indian state. The first one being the Kashmir region. Then you might have learned about the Junagadh region, right? And you might have heard about the Hyderabad region. So Hyderabad was under Nizams. When we are talking about Kashmir, it was under the king. And when we are talking about Junagadh, it was under the local king. So here when we are talking about Kashmir, Hari Singh. So right in that sense, when we are talking about the Nagaland area, so obviously these people, the Naga tribes at that particular time, they were demanding complete independence. Okay, not for 10-year period anymore, but right now they were looking forward to complete independence. But government of India at that particular time, they insisted that this should be decided, or there should be a further agreement over this. Okay, now at the same time, please remember that the Constituent Assembly here, it was now deciding that how we should start on making our constitution. Okay, it was during this period, the first meeting that was held in the year 1949, but here we see that they were also trying to look forward to the issues of the Naga people here. How to look forward to their culture, how to look forward to preserve their tradition, how to look forward to preserve their identity, and so many other things, right? So here we see that the Constituent Assembly, they also started setting up different committees. Now the committee that was set up here was the Advisory Committee on Tribal Affairs, to look forward to the demands of the tribal people and try to understand what are they looking forward to and how to fulfill their demands here. Right. So here we see that there was a person known as Mr. G. Bordoli, right, who was the Chief Minister of Assam, and he was sent here to assess and advise on further or future administration of the Naga people to govern themselves and to be the tribal head for both tribal and excluded areas. So this is the image here of Mr. G. Bordoloi. Okay, so he was a person here who was given the in charge to look forward to the issue here, right? So here we see that finally a decision was taken that they should be provided autonomy and freedom in local matters. So when we are talking about Nagaland, which is still not, it has not been granted the statehood here. So the decision right now was taken that while we are talking about the advisory committee, they look forward to the issue here, looking forward to the demands of the tribal chiefs and the tribal people here, right? So they said that we can provide you autonomy, or let's say freedom, in local matters, okay, at district levels. But here we see that again the provisions were signed for the 5th and 6th schedules of the Indian Constitution, now which was drawn up, which provided for setting up district councils. Now when we are talking about the schedules in the Indian Constitution, everyone is aware that in our Indian Constitution we have articles, right or not? We have parts and we have schedules, right? So you might be aware about it. So when we are talking about the 5th and 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, here we are talking about the setting up of district councils, and where all these Naga chiefs, the tribal rulers here, or the local rulers here, or the local people, they would be given freedom in local matters, right? But here when we are talking about the Naga people, please remember that were they wanting this? Were they looking forward to local freedom or autonomy in that sense? No. They were looking for complete independence. If you look at the larger perspective, how India was looking for complete independence or Purna Swaraj from the British Empire, they also wanted to create their own larger state here, right? So it was in the year 1951 that we see that there was a total boycott of elections of district council. Now the decision was taken that they should be given the local autonomy here, or let's say autonomy in local matters here. But were they happy? They were not happy or satisfied with this. And based on this reaction, all the people of Nagaland here, they boycotted the elections that took place for the district council. Again in 1952, please remember that the first general election. Now everyone must have heard about the general elections that take place in our country, which is also known as the Lok Sabha elections for different constituencies, and it takes place after every 5 years. So the first general election was conducted in the year that is 1952. After India got independence, the first general election, full-fledged election, took place in 1952. Now it was also boycotted by the Naga people. They did not want to participate in that. Now before that we also see that on 16th May 1951, the NNC, that means we are talking about the Naga National Council here, right? So it was under the presidency of A.Z. Fizzo. Now this is the image of A.Z. Fizzo. He was a very renowned figure here. He conducted a plebiscite. Now what do we understand by this term, that is plebiscite? What do we understand by this term? Have you ever heard about this term here? Let us try to understand. So when we are talking about the term that is plebiscite here, you need to understand that it was a general vote in yes and no that was conducted for a particular area. So plebiscite in general sense is that a general vote that a political question is being asked to all the people who are living in an enclosed territory. So here we are taking the example of Nagaland. So in this enclosed territory, all those people who were the part or the citizen of this region, they had to vote. They had to give their agreement or disagreement on the question being asked here, the political question that was being asked here. Okay. Now the question here was that what do they want to have a separate statehood? Do they want to have their own separate state? What do they want complete freedom here? So we see that the Nagas, they responded with tremendous enthusiasm. They were very much excited, and NNC, definitely this was the umbrella organization that respected or it talked about the views of all the people who were living in this enclosed territory. So 99% of the people, they voted overwhelmingly in favor of complete political self-determination free from any external domination. So since the beginning, right now you have been learning about that how Nagas, they were looking forward to complete independence and not the partial independence. And finally a plebiscite was done in the year 1951, in which 99% of people, they demanded that they want complete independence without any intervention of external domination, be it the Indian government or any other XYZ government. Okay. So as a result of it, it was on 22nd March 1956 that the Nagas, they declared the formation of a Naga Federal Republic. Please remember that we are talking about that they already had taken a decision here through the plebiscite here, when people, they voted in favor of complete independence. So because of this, it was finally in 1956 that the Nagas, they declared the formation of a Naga Federal Republic with a standing army that was known as Naga Home Guards, that you can still see today. So here we see that they now were building up their own army, the standing army, that was known as Naga Home Guards. Okay. Now, the next point that you need to understand here is the formation of Nagaland state and the 16-point proposal. Before this, we have understood that how they voted in favor for complete independence and free from the external domination here. Now here we see that we will look forward to the story how the Nagaland state or the statehood was granted to the region, that is Nagaland, that we are talking about in present today. Okay, so here we see that the first Naga People Convention, it was convened on 22nd August 1957 in Kohima. Now Kohima, that is the present capital here of Nagaland. Everyone is aware? It was in the year 1958 that we see the drafting committee was set up to chalk out a plan for further status of Naga Hills. Right or not? So you just need to remember here the important date that now we are looking forward to the year 1963. In 1963, everyone knows that Nagaland was given the status of the state here. Okay. But here what happened before that? How we come to this conclusion? So in 1958, they were chalking out some plans on what are the decisions or what are the things that they need to talk forward about. So here we see that this committee, a committee that was formed here, it formulated a 16-point proposal. Please look at this point here, formation of Naga state and 16-point proposal. So a proposal of 16 points was formulated here, was created here, which would serve as the basis for the creation of Naga state. Now they are looking forward for the creation of their own state here. Okay. So students, like I told you before 1947, that is pre-partition, we see that the British India was divided into two parts, princely states and the provinces. Right. So here when we are talking about Nagaland, we see that again it was a region where the local rulers, they were ruling. Okay, right or not? So we see that the British intervention that took place in the year 1881, while the idea was for trading purposes and later on occupying the administration of this place, how far we have come through is that we are talking about the period that is 1958 and then we'll move on to the period that is 1963 here. So here we see that a 16-point proposal was created that would serve as the basis for the creation of Naga state. So these are certain points that would be followed in order to create a Naga state, separate state here. So these proposals were then submitted to the Government of India for consideration. Now, when the committee was formed, when they were looking forward for their own complete independence without any external domination here, not integrating through or not integrating in India, finally we see that they are composing their own points. So here they sent this letter, this recommendation to the Indian government. Now, after settling all constitutional formalities, we see that finally Nagaland state was officially inaugurated on 1st December 1963. So it was in the year 1963 that Nagaland was granted the status of statehood. So you need to remember this point here. Okay. So let us go to this map here. I'll just erase all the points. If we look at this region here, this is Assam, this is Arunachal Pradesh. So here we have Manipur, Mizoram, we have Myanmar here, our neighboring country. So this is a small place that we are talking about here. It was granted the status of statehood in 1963, 1st December. Please remember this point here. Now, if we look at the present map of Nagaland, you can see these are the different districts here. Okay. Now, here last point that you need to talk about or need to understand is about the peace mission and the ceasefire of 1964.